crime. Her newest book, No Place Like Murder, is a collection of 20 true crime stories that rocked Indiana between 1869 and 1950. Her latest novel, Love, Eyes, and Azure Eyes, is a suspenseful paranormal romantic mystery about possibilities for second chances, righting old wrongs, and finding love that lasts forever. Her 2018 nonfiction release, Too Good a Girl, tells the story of Janice's high school classmate, Oline Emberton, whose tragic unsolved death in 1965 shocked their community. With Janice's book, she has made sure this story is never forgotten. So let's welcome Janice. And she was also our speaker for our Women's Expo, and she got to talk about her book and her research for the Good a Girl, which I read, and it was very well done. So you were born in Muncie. How long did you live there, and where are some of the places you've lived since? I know a few, so I'm very interested in hearing about that.
Okay, well, I was born in Muncie, and my dad worked for the Nickel Plate Railroad, and so he got transferred to Tipton. So we moved to Tipton when I was like 4, and so I grew up in Tipton, and then after high school, I moved to Columbus, Ohio, and after 6 years, I moved to LA. And after 21 years out in California, then I moved back to Tipton, and I am now living in the very house where I grew up.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that. That's great. What kind of family did you have? What did your parents do? We just heard that your dad worked for Nickel Plate. That's pretty cool. It's still well known. And then you lived in Los Angeles, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you say you lived in Los Angeles? And then what took you there? And what took you to Los Angeles? And
my dad's father had moved out there probably before I was born, and he lived in San Luis Obispo. So when I was in the 2nd grade, we took our first road trip out to California to visit him, and then we went down to LA. I loved being in Hollywood, and so we just went there for a vacation, and I knew in the 2nd grade that that's where I wanted to live when I grew up. And so it wasn't very hard to move out there when I finally got around to it. It was 1972, because my aunt and uncle and all my cousins lived out there. And so I went out there and I stayed with my aunt and uncle. They lived in a little community called Pico Rivera, which is right by Whittier, which you've probably heard of, Whittier, California, where Nixon lived. Come on, you know Whittier. And I went out there and I stayed with them for about a month until I found a job in an apartment, and then I was on my own.
Yeah, I've taken a couple plane trips there, visited twice, both times with my best friend, and it was a lot of fun, very interesting. I just remember the traffic though, a lot of traffic. Takes you forever to get anywhere.
It's much worse now than it was in 1972.
Yeah, but I just love the ocean, so that's my favorite. I love that. Yep. Were you by the ocean? Yeah,
no,
great.
And I went to the beach quite often.
Yeah, that's great. As a writer, what drew you to reading books, and what were some of your childhood favorites?
What drew me to reading books? I don't, probably just school. That's what we did growing up. We were encouraged to read, and I did go to the library quite a bit, but I only remember the very first novel that I ever completed was called The Wonderful Flight to the Mushroom Planet. I know it's a biggie. I'm sure you've all heard of it. It's a bestseller. It was about 2 boys who built a spaceship and they went to an alien planet. That's about all I can remember. But I also remember reading Nancy Drew and all these Disney books that were based on characters, like Annette and Spin and Marty, and in the comic books. That's about all I remember growing up.
Okay, this is a question that people ask all the time, and we talked about this question all the time in interviews, but I was thinking about this one too, the answer to it. But if you could choose 3 people to invite for a dinner party, who would they be and why? Have you had time to think about it?
I've thought about it. Yeah, it's probably not going to be, an answer that you're going to think is, very creative, but I would love to have a chance to talk with um, oh my gosh, I forgot her name, Sue Grafton, my favorite author. She died a little over a year ago, and I was heartbroken. I almost got to meet her once, but then something happened and I had to cancel it. I had an appointment with her. Broke
Oh,
my heart, and I just love her. Are you familiar with her Kinsey Millhone series? She did the alphabet, like A is for alibi,
yeah,
B is for
absolutely.
regret, on and on until she finished Y, and then she died.
Oh,
It was, and I just loved her. I loved her writing, and I loved her voice, and so I would love to have a chance to talk with her. And then um, just because I would love to have a chance to talk with Stephen King, wouldn't you?
yes.
And then the last one on, you said to pick three. The last one is not an author. The last person I would love to talk to is Oline Emberton. Do you know who she is? She's my
She's
classmate who was murdered in 1965, because I would just love 5 minutes with her to find out what happened.
yes, absolutely. We on Halloween, we put up the Christmas tree, of course, and we watched it, and Stephen King made a
Oh,
cameo in
did
it.
he?
And so that was I was like, that's Stephen King. So he was very cool to see him in there. So um but so now we'll move on to you as a writer. We'll ask a few questions about that. Um
Okay.
uh so actually, when did you know you wanted to be a writer? Because I knew in second grade and first grade that I wanted to be an artist, and then
Ah,
so I knew then that's what I wanted to do. So
well, I can remember writing in the sixth grade. As a matter of fact, when I moved back into this house, went up in the attic and I found, going through all boxes, and I found a manuscript that I was working on in the sixth grade, and it was a short story about a young woman who um, wanted to live in New York City. So she moves to New York City, and she gets a job as a waitress at the Sleepy Time bar. And okay, yeah. So I was always writing things. I never finished that story because really, a sixth grader living in Tipton, what could I have possibly known about being a barmaid at the Sleepy Time bar? Nothing. So I never finished that story. But I did. I'm very proud of this, that my first publishing credit came to me when I was a seventh grader. Our English teacher had encouraged the class to write poems that she could submit to some national anthology for seventh and eighth graders. So I got my poem published that year, and it was about Easter bonnets.
oh,
That was it.
wonderful.
That was yes, it was. I can still recite it to this day. So I'm very proud that, as at probably age 12 or 13, I was published for the first time.
Very nice. Yeah. I almost chose journalism. I was an editor of our high school newspaper. And when I started college, I strongly considered going into journalism, but something swayed me. So, yeah, but here I am.
So
um, what is your writing process like? I actually have this book that talks about different writers and where they work, and their workspace and what their process is. How do they make themselves sit down for 20 minutes, or even if they don't have anything to write? So what does your process look like? Do you have one, or I mean, what is that?
well, I wish that I had one. Um, I used to have one. I used to get up real early in the morning at, like 5, and work for a couple hours before I started getting ready for work. I don't do that anymore. When I'm serious about getting something finished, I just work on it every chance I get. And if I can write a page, I'm happy. So I wish that I had, I could tell you that I have a place, a special place that I go, and a ritual, but I don't. The most important thing is to just sit down and write, and just write. The most
Right.
important thing is to get it, out of your head and onto your computer screen or onto some paper, so you have something to work with.
Right.
So,
Do you carry around a notebook or anything whenever something comes to you, or an idea that,
I
or a
do have
napkin?
a
Grab a
notebook.
napkin in a restaurant, or
Yeah, I have yeah, and sometimes I'll write it on my hand, but I do have a little notebook that I carry around, and usually I get my best ideas while I'm driving, which is kind of funny when I look at that, the notes later, because you can hardly read them. That
yeah,
is yes, that is an important thing to do, is carry your notepad.
yeah, absolutely.
Do you do
Agree.
that too, you say?
Well, my best idea is I don't listen to music or anything. I have a 40-minute commute, and that's my best ideas for
Yeah.
work come from my drive and my
Yeah.
commute.
Well, when
So,
I used to drive from here, Tipton, to Purdue. So that was like an hour drive each
wow.
way.
Yeah.
And when I was working on something, I would carry a tape recorder.
Oh, that's a great
My
idea.
best dialogue was while I was driving.
Yeah, I can see that. I'm so, yeah, I think I can see that. It's mesmerizing to drive and your brain is really in its best place, I think. So
Yeah.
I get it. Yeah. Um, so I'm very curious on your, I think it's got to be difficult. What kind of research do you do, and how long do you spend researching before beginning a book? And this could be for your fiction and for your nonfiction, your true crime books. Um, I mean, how does your research work? Like, how does that, is it a long time? Because I know you probably had to jump to a lot of different libraries, a lot of different places for your latest book.
Yeah,
Then,
particularly for this one. Let's just talk about this one. This was the most research that was required for any book. Um, these old true crimes, these old mostly murders. So I rely a lot on online newspaper databases, which I subscribe to newspapers.com, and I couldn't live without it.
oh,
Everything is reported in the old newspapers, and that what's so great about these online databases is that they are searchable. So I can search for names and specific dates and towns. That's primarily it. I also, for this book, I also went to different went through old court files. So for instance, in the book, there's a story of Bill Schinkenberger's murder and the case of Frankie Miller. I went to your courthouse, and sorry, but I cannot remember the name of the lady who was in charge of the files, but she was very kind to me and let me take my computer and my scanner, and go through these files and scan records. And I've got the note that the head of the man in charge of the jury foreman, handed to the judge, with written on, that's written on there that, that we find the defendant, Sarah Schinkenberger, guilty in the first degree. I actually, I scanned that and I posted it on my blog when I visited Bill Schinkenberger's grave. So that's available if you want to see it. I just think it's just fascinating. And then for Frankie Miller, I scanned the notes that they wrote each other. And so there were all these records, which was, very helpful information. I did the same thing over here in Tipton, went to the Historical Society where they have all the court records. And that's actually where I found one of my cases, the one about Daniel Snyder, who poisoned his wife and stepdaughter back in, I think it was 1869. So that's, and then there are old books too that county historians wrote back in the turn of the century, which now are available online through Google. So these are some of the, and I must also point out the Indiana State Library is another fantastic resource. They've got all of the newspapers that are not available on newspapers.com. You can go there on microfilm, and they've also got clip files. It's just a fabulous resource. So don't ever forget to go there. It's near downtown Indianapolis.
Right.
Okay. And then the old microfilm too. Before I subscribed to newspapers.com, before I even knew about it, I went to the Frankfort Library, the library in Kokomo and Anderson and Noblesville, and went through microfilm looking for old crimes that I could write about.
And from what I understand is that so your Too Good a Girl was actually not going to be in a full novel or a full book. It was actually that's where you got some of these stories for this book. And then all of a sudden Too Good a Girl became bigger than what you had expected, the research. And so you were able to use these stories. Could you explain that a little bit, what happened there?
Yeah, at first when I was doing I had been researching the case with my classmate for 15 years, and I had thought I would do it as like a short story, maybe 5,000 or 6,000 words, and then I would surround it with other old case stories. And the book would turn out like pretty much like what No Place Like Murder is, only the Olene story would be the centerpiece. But it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And one of my friends convinced me that, you need to write a whole book about this. So I pulled the Olene story out, did the book, and then I still had several of these other stories that I already had written. So I just went ahead and added to it. And my original idea with this No Place Like Murder would be 15 stories with 3 in each in the counties of Tipton, Clinton, Hamilton, Howard, and Madison. And once I got, I pitched the idea to Indiana University Press, and they liked the idea. They wanted to do it, but they asked me if I would add 2 more stories, one set way up north and one set in southern Indiana. So I, said, that's fine, no problem there. I said, but why don't I do 5 more and make it 20 instead of 17? I just thought that sounded better. Yeah. So that's how that came together.
Yeah, they were both well done. I mean, they worked out just perfect. I loved reading them. I thought they were
thanks.
Very fascinating, interesting, and I was just so amazed at how you're able to find and put together a story from 1860, like how you are able to do that. It just fascinates me.
That's one of the prerequisites for when I pick these stories, that there has to be lots of news stories written about them. That's true. Because that is my primary source of information.
Yep. Okay. I think we've already answered this. Let's go to the next one. What is the most difficult part of your artistic process of creating a book or creating ideas? What's the most difficult part of making it come to fruition?
The most difficult part, I guess, is just getting it written. It's just sitting down, making myself sit down every day and keep plugging away at it. Because I don't really think that it's hard once I get going. There is, for me, and that's it for me. It's not that hard, because once I get going, I just want to get it done.
Yeah.
Okay, let me rephrase that, because I will say that the writing is the hardest part and the least amount of fun.
Yeah.
Getting it down the first time is hard work. Once I get that down, then the fun really starts, when I'm going through there and I'm cleaning it up and adding and editing. It's really a lot of fun. So I don't know if did I answer your question? I don't know if I did, but
you mentioned Sue Grafton. Yeah, as one of you would say she influenced you. Would you say that? Do you have other authors that may
I love her character.
You love her what?
Other authors. Yeah.
Yeah, do you have other authors that influenced you in your writing? Who would they be?
Yeah, well, I would say Stephen King, of course. And gosh, nothing is coming to mind. Oh my God. Other cozy writers, there's Nancy Pickard. And are you familiar with William Kent Kruger? These are
I'm
my
not.
favorites. And you don't know him?
No.
You must.
Yeah, well, I will after this
Yeah.
interview because I will Google him. Let's
But
see.
nobody has influenced me like Sue Grafton. Her voice and her character, I just love. And I kind of think of Crystal Cropper, my character in my two cozies. Do you see any resemblance in her in the two characters? Are you familiar with her?
I'm not, but maybe if here, let me unmute Mike and I can't unmute them.
You can't? Oh, they have to do it themselves.
Okay, there, go ahead. Do you see?
Oh, okay. Good. Similarity between them in the two books, you mean, or?
In the characters of Crystal Cropper and Kinsey Milhone, they're both kind of, sassy and,
Oh, okay, it's good. I'm sorry, I don't know Krista
Okay.
Milholland, but I know yours. I know Krista.
Okay. Well, I would encourage you to get familiar with Sue Grafton. You would love her.
When I did outreach, I picked her books a lot for people to start her series, and they were really popular with the senior centers. So we had all of her books in large print, and I always grabbed her. She was one of the authors I always grabbed for people that like mysteries and things like that. So, and then people would always want more. So she was very popular, I would say. What do you look for when searching for your next story to tell? Like, what do you, so what do you look for when you're coming up with your next story? When do you know you have a good idea?
Yeah, I just found one the other day, and I've been recording all the all the stories to get started on it. So it's the shock value and the surprises, and just stories that seem out of place for what you think would be appropriate for that time and that area. So like the Frankie Miller story, that was a very shocking story for Frankfort, if you're familiar with it. Frankie Miller, who is the one who was a scorned lover who shot her boyfriend. And, that story went coast to coast. So that's the kind of story that I look for, something that's got a lot of sensationalism and, unexpected things that happen. And the paper's full of them. The old newspapers are full of them. So searching for those takes up quite a bit of time. But once I land on one, like this one that I found, that it took place in 1920, where a little boy was shot and died, and his 11-year-old playmate, was charged with first-degree murder with the possibility of execution.
Wow.
Life in prison. And that, I mean, you agree that's pretty shocking, right?
Yes.
How often would that happen? And I plan to find out, has that ever happened since? That was the first time that had ever happened, but I don't know if it's happened since then. But I will do some more research to find out. So those are the kind of stories that I look for, just the stories that you just are just so surprised that could ever happen.
Have you ever had to give up on a book that you created and started and worked on?
And I haven't. Well, I mean, I have stories that and I don't quit them so much as I get started on something else. I have a ton of things that I want to get back to and finish. Oh. But I would never be seriously working on something and then just say, oh, I just can't, I can't do this anymore. You know, if I've hit a wall, I want to find a way to fix that, because I figure once I've spent that much time and energy and, you know, brain power on something, I'm not going to just pitch it. I might rework it a little bit, but I'm not one to give up.
Right. So we'll talk about your current book a little more. You did a cemetery tour, and this was for this book. Is that correct? I saw it. My mom loves the paper. She doesn't have any digital. She doesn't have a cell phone. She doesn't have anything. So she sends me articles all the time, and she sent me a picture of you at a cemetery. She told me about it. And so tell us how it related to your book, how it affected you more by visiting the cemetery, and some of that.
Okay, well, for the current, for anybody who doesn't know, for the current book with the crime stories, I got this idea. It was back in 2016 that I wanted to visit the grave sites of as many people who are, you know, either the victims or the killers, as many of these grave sites as I could find, because after I did all this research and spent this much time, you know, looking into their lives and writing about them and telling their stories, I really feel like I know them. You know, I would like to say that they became friends, but I don't want to say that, because I don't want to be friends with murderers. But I just felt like I needed to see their grave, and just as a way of the last connection. So I started out in December of 2016 and went over to Greentown and visited the grave of Jess Osborne, who shot and killed his girlfriend, Fairy McLean Miller, in the face. I believe it was, now I can't remember the year, if it was 1903 or 1908. And his story was just so interesting to me, because I really felt that he filled with regret that he did it. He was ashamed and embarrassed and hated himself for what he had done. So he died in prison in 1920. So he's buried over there in the family plot. So I went over there to visit him, and it just meant something to me. I just felt like I knew him, and I felt a sense of remorse. And I know that's nuts. So I kept it up. I really liked visiting, and part of it was just because I have this innate thing about digging for information. You know, I think I would have made a great detective. So I found I found 3 other grave sites in Kokomo, in a lot of them in this area, in Anderson, Frankfort, Tipton. Then most recently, I finished off my little, I called it my road trip with the dead, and I drove down to Aurora, Indiana, which is right on the Ohio River, visited the graves of 5 victims and their killer. And then the last place I went was way up north to Steuben County to visit the grave of Sepharna Gleason, who was the victim, and I could not find her daughter, who was her killer. I could not find that gravesite. So I wrote about that. I took my picture at each of these grave sites, and then I wrote a blog about, you know, a little overview of what the crime was, and then how I found their grave, and any information, anything that I picked up and sensed while I was there. And people seem to enjoy reading those, and I sure enjoyed writing about them.
You talk about your blog. I've been to your website a few times to get information. Is your blog, I can't remember if your blog, if there's a link to your blog on your website, or is that separate?
It's right there. Just click.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to check that out. So I will be doing that. Very nice.
Those are so fun to go to all those cemeteries all over the state.
I love old headstones, but I mean, it's just imagining how did they die, or, you know, or what happened. And it's just, yeah, it's very interesting. And
like walking through graveyards. It's just, you don't know who those people were. I think it's just endlessly fascinating.
Yeah. So does one of the characters hold a special place in your heart? If so, why? You have to, I mean, there has to be some connection with at least one that you feel special to or something.
You mean in the new book?
Your latest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My favorite character in that book is Isabel Mesmer, who lived in Elwood. She's from Elwood, and she became known as Gun Girl, and she made headlines from coast to coast during the Depression era. And she was 15 in 1930 when she ran away from home, and she made national news the first time in 1933 in Pittsburgh. She had gone to the bus station and cleaned out her locker, and she had a gun in the locker, and she didn't know it, but she was being observed by two plainclothes officers who then followed her from the bus station up to her hotel room, where they burst in and tried to, their intent was to arrest her, but she fought them. I mean, physically, punching and kicking, and they finally, grabbed her and, took her out and got her in the car and took her to jail. Well, Isabel was so adorable. She was a little tiny, petite thing, and just as cute as she could be, and bubbly and, feisty. And so she somehow managed to get her picture taken with the Pittsburgh chief of police. It's in the book, where they're sitting at his desk and they're both pointing guns at each other and grinning. And that picture got picked up and went, coast to coast. And that's when she got the name Gun Girl. Yeah. So she became a legend in her own time, because they kept putting her in jail and she kept escaping. And she finally did her time in Odessa, Texas. I think she just got tired. It was, I think it was like 1942. I'm not positive, 42 or 44. She had killed a man in Texas, but she got sentenced to 3 years, and then they reduced that to 1.5 years, and she did her time. And why, you're probably wondering why it was such a short sentence for, murder, but it was self-defense. He was assaulting her. So she did her time and she went away, and we never heard from her again. She's a legend over in Elwood, and I'm told that she ended up in Florida and just lived a very quiet life.
Yeah, I know. I wanted to know more about her, what her life after all that. Like, did she have kids? Was she a grandma? Did she bake pies after, what kind of?
Yeah, that's very frustrating, because I couldn't find a thing, and I tried real hard.
Yeah. She should have, kept a little higher profile for us, so you could have it in the book. But yeah, I pictured everything. That story was one of my favorites too, because I could picture everything that she did and see her in great vividly, actually. So okay. Oh, did you edit any stories from this book that you could tell us? Did you not put a story in because you were doing 20? Was there a story that you kept out that you had or anything?
There is a funny story that, no, I didn't, but I had a story that was almost complete. And I think it's funny. I'll just tell you, it was a murder in Tipton County. There were 3 guys playing cards out in the woods somewhere, and one of them kind of lost his mind and shot and killed one of the other guys, and the third guy he was running away. He got shot, but he escaped. So I forget the guy's name. It was an odd name. Gieselbach. Anybody know a Gieselbach from Elwood? And that happened in 1954. So I did all the work, and I had that story almost finished. And one of the things I want to throw in, these stories that in the book, I picked them because they happened so long ago, and I didn't want to choose anything more recent than, 1955 at the latest, because I didn't want to take a chance that there would be family that I would, that would, somehow be offended or be embarrassed or hurt by these stories being, brought back. So I had this Gieselbach story almost finished. And, I work over in Elwood at the Chamber of Commerce, and some man came in one day. His name was Gieselbach. And I said, oh, that's a familiar name. Did you ever know Jack? And he said, oh yeah, I saw him just the other day. That's the punchline.
Yeah, wow.
So I took all that material and I threw it out. I mean, I set it aside. I thought, well, I can't use it because, he's still around. So I found another.
That's crazy. Wow. Well, so I'm going to leave the rest of the time. I'm going to stop the questions. I'm going to open it up for Mike, Amy, or Greg has joined us if they have any questions for you about your new book, any of your other books. So let's everyone unmute. You guys can unmute yourself, and then so Amy, if you'd like to ask a question, just go ahead and write something in the chat, and then Mike and Pam, if you want to ask something, you can just raise your hand. Greg, if you want to ask something, you could ask in the chat. But let's leave it open for questions, and then we'll close. Thank you, Janice. This was great.
Well, thank you.
Great answers.
No questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Am I echoing?
You are, but I can still hear you.
One moment. Let me.
Very. Ooh.
Okay. Is the echo gone now?
Yes.
Yeah, it sure is.
Okay, good. I had 2 instances open. How did you choose who to leave out? Like, I know Indiana more than 50 years ago. How did you choose to leave out the big ones, like maybe Belle Gunnis or someone like that?
Okay. I didn't want to write about anyone who had been written about. I wanted my book to be new material. The only story in there that had been written about that I recall was the one about the Kokomo Mayor coal. And that one had been written about one time in a book, quite a long time ago, and some newspaper articles. But everything I included in there was would have been new stories to people. Now I know that locally, people are aware in Frankfort about Amos Hamilton, but I don't think that he's been written about in a book. So that was my criteria, was to only choose stories that would be new, because, Belle Guinness has been written about, so many times. And there are some others, the one, I forget his name, White Lights in the Big City. You know what I mean?
H.H. Holmes.
Yeah, that one. So I deliberately chose people where it would be new material.
I have a question, or just an observation. When I read Olene's story, I was shocked by how little transfer of information went from sheriff to sheriff, from the police officers to police officers. That was, I just assumed everyone kept wonderful records and that they would pass those. I remember thinking, my goodness, that would be so hard to step into something that was ongoing. And that was such a perfect example of something that was ongoing and still going on, and what was lost as a result of it. So,
yeah, when I got that information, when the book was nearing completion, about the transfer of information. And that was a relief to me because, around here, there's so many rumors about Sheriff Grimmy having a hand in, it was like it was a deliberate cover up. And I felt that was not true. And so when I found out that he didn't just destroy his records. You know, it was just that was just the custom. I mean, he didn't withhold things, but they just didn't. It wasn't just him that did that. So I thought, well, that was a confirmation of what I believed on what happened to the records. But it is it's shocking, isn't it, that there was no continuity from one administration to the next. And I also found out after the book came out, because I had given it to a man that I'd become acquainted with, who was the former director of the Indiana State Police Crime Lab. So he went through the book. It was after it was published, and he explained that, you know, that they didn't deliberately mess up the crime scene, that they just didn't have good training. They didn't know. Even the state police wasn't very well trained, he said. And as far as the county sheriffs, there was practically no training involved. So, which to me, it helps explain why this case wasn't solved, because they just didn't know what to do.
Hey, Janice, I got a question. When you were out in LA back in the day, you know, what kind of work did you do out there?
Well, like every year I would switch to a different job, because that's just the way we did things when we were, you know, in our 20s.
Yes.
So, I started out as a secretary at United Artists Records.
Oh, yeah.
Very cool. I love it.
Yeah, I think it was Bobby Goldsboro. He passed me one day, you know, in the office. And so I love this story because, you know, he walked by my desk and I turned around, you know, to watch him walk away. And when I turned around, he turned around. Oh, after that, I worked at a security industry trade association and was responsible for security industry trade shows, which was really cool. But I ended up doing I had my own business doing graphics and typesetting. And I did that for about 10 years. And that was extremely helpful for, you know, what I do now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I had another question. A friend of mine who actually lives out in California, and up the road a little bit up in Tehachapi, and he's been trying to get and he's going through the process of getting a book published. Okay, so he's the first time he's ever tried to publish anything, and he's telling me these stories about how hard it is and all this kind of stuff like that, and how it's you know, just going on and on and on. And so I guess it would be the simple question is how do you get, of course you're established now, but how did you get your books or your first book published, or what was the process?
What kind of book did he write? You have to look for publishers that are looking for books that you've written, you know, the kind of books that you've written. Mm-hmm. So do you know what he's got?
Yeah. Well, he's got it. It's in the publisher, and he seems like he's on his way now, but
okay.
He found the right kind of publisher to publish the person that's interested in publishing his kind of books. It's a historical book about aviation and so forth and so on. So so it's basically an aviation type publisher, you know. But he was just, the whole process just seems like it's extremely it just seems extremely hard to be published, you know, or to publish a book, you know. Right.
Well, you have to make a list. You have to go do a lot of research to find out what publishers are looking for a book like the one you've just written. And then you have to query them. You know, you have to go to their website, go to the publisher's website and see what they're looking for, and see how they want you to submit your query. You know, that's the query usually typically is a synopsis, a cover letter, and a certain number of pages from your completed project. And every publisher asks for it in a different way. You know, some will want a one-page synopsis. Others will want one paragraph or 3 pages. And then they'll want, when they want, a portion of your manuscript, they'll want the first chapter or the first 10 pages or the first 50 pages. And so you have to give them exactly what they ask for without deviating, without straying from what they asked for by a hair, or they'll pitch it, because most of the time they have more submissions than they can handle. So they're looking for any excuse. So, and a lot of times people want to go through an agent, let the agent do the search for the publisher, but an agent is just as hard to find. And it's a very similar process. So I don't.
Once you get established with the publisher, your second book with that publisher would be maybe easier, or?
Yes, for me, when I did my first mystery, then I wrote the second one, and they were happy to publish that. But the third one, I think by the time my third novel is not part of that series. It was a little different, it's a romance, a romantic mystery with a paranormal twist. That's what I call it, because there's a ghost in it. Well, they didn't want to do that, because that wasn't, that's not what they're looking for. So I went out and found a different publisher.
Oh, I see.
And oddly enough, I do have on my website, if you want, you can go to my website, and there's a button at the top for writer resources. And the first 2 files at the top are related to how to find a publisher, because I recently did a program about that, so I posted those things there.
Oh,
so
your website is your name.com or something?
JanissThornton.com.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
I have one last question and then we'll close. It's from Amy. She says, true crime podcasts and TV shows are extremely popular right now. What are some of your favorites?
I don't watch those shows. I'm sorry. Huh?
Or books maybe, or
I
a
do
true
have
crime
some
book.
books I wanted to show you some books, but I'm really not interested in true crime per se. I'm only interested in the old historic crimes, with the element of history. I do like criminal, I think Mind Hunters. I think that was it. It's on Netflix.
I watched that. Yeah, I finished it. Yeah.
Love that. And I mean, that's based on, that's a true story, based on a true story about how the FBI started their profiling division.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of that.
I'm not giving a very satisfactory answer on my favorite true crime shows, because they just don't interest me, because they're all, current stuff. But I did have these books I wanted to recommend, because they're.
Okay. We'll end with that. That's awesome. Perfect.
Okay. All right.
Them.
These 2 are like mine. Are these showing up? Okay. This is, Murders That Made Indiana Headlines. It's also, this was published by IU Press.
I'll send an email out. If you want to also email those to me, I'll forward them to everyone too.
Okay, and here's one, Murder and Mayhem in Indiana. It's published by History Press. Who's Your Killers? By Blue River Press. So those were all, 3 that I had that were sort of like mine.
Well, those sound great. I love it. My mom loves true crime, and so she's loving your book. And that's, if I'm gonna buy her a book, it's gonna be a true crime book. So
okay.
Yeah. And so I wanted to thank you. This has been Janiss Thornton. I'm Jamie Anderson. I never really told anyone who I was, but I'm the Hubbard Center for Lifelong Learning Coordinator. And so I want to thank everyone that came. So hopefully, this is going to be the new norm, the Zoom, for a little while. So I hope that you'll check out some more programs that'll come up. And Janice, your book was great. I loved it. Your other one was great. So
thank you, and thank you for suggesting this and for hosting it and asking your brilliant questions.
That I stole. I stole these questions.
I don't know. Is stealing questions a true crime?
Right. Just keep it between us. All right. Thanks, Mike and Pam, for coming. And Amy, I think I already left.
Nice
it was
to see
really
you
good
again,
to see you,
Janice.
Mike and Pam. Really good to see you. Say hi to Nancy.
We'll do that.
Okay. All right.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.
Leave it.